Hello, and welcome to this webinar on epistemology for A-level philosophy students. I'm Michael Lacewing, and we're going to work over the next hour and a half through a couple of PowerPoints. And what I'll do is give you opportunities while we're going through these PowerPoints to ask questions. You can do this by using the question panel on your control panel, which gives you an opportunity to type things in. And when I pause, I'll give you that chance, and then I'll look at the questions that you've typed in, and I will respond to them. I hope that you can hear me and that you can see me all right. You can also use that panel just to let me know now or at any point if there's a problem with the sound or if the picture has cut out. Please do pass that information on. I'm relying on you to tell me because it doesn't always flag up immediately if there's a problem. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start the PowerPoint, and so I'm not too distracting sitting over the top, I'm going to turn my camera off. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint coming on now, and I'm just going to turn the camera off. Okay. So we're going to start this webinar on epistemology by having a look at the question of what knowledge is. But before we even get that far, we should think about why we're even asking this question. Why is it important for us to talk about knowledge? Why have philosophers or human beings been interested in knowledge? And the first sort of obvious answer is to say that we need to know things in order to survive at all. You can't go around meeting your simple bodily needs, being able to find food or shelter, knowing where water is. All of these things are very important. And the first importance of knowledge to human beings is simply to be able to survive. Now, that's a very basic form of knowledge. It's a very limited kind of knowledge, but nevertheless, it is absolutely central to be able to act on the world, to be able to satisfy our desires and fulfill them. We need to be able to find out certain things about how the world is. So that's a sort of starting point for thinking about why knowledge might be important to us. Of course, we've gone well beyond that now. We have various ways in which science and technology have expanded our abilities to know about the world and to change it. So, for example, just the recent revolution in communication brought by the mobile phone and then the internet and then social media. Many of these technologies, though some of us certainly don't understand them, have enabled us to do things which perhaps we didn't necessarily need to do, but we wanted to do, to be able to communicate much more broadly, and indeed with the internet to find out more things more easily than we have before. So there are ways in which this kind of technology, which is based on investigating the properties of certain metals and the way in which radio waves communicate between devices, all of that has been certainly extended what we're using knowledge for and how we're able to satisfy our desires and our needs. So science and technology builds on the initial sort of this is what I need in order to survive to this is what I'd like to do. But I think there's more to knowledge than that as well. So for example, we are social creatures. We need to know about other people. We need to know what they're thinking and what they're likely to do. And we want to coordinate our activities with them. We don't try to meet our needs on our own. So this means that we need to have knowledge of language and we need to have some understanding of each other's psychology. We need to be able to be sensitive to people's emotions, their responses, how they're likely to act under different situations. And this gives rise to sort of new forms of knowledge and new interests in knowledge, knowledge about the human world and the ways in which it can be shaped and the ways in which it can be changed through communication. But I think we also go beyond even that in the ways in which we find knowledge important. In the ways that I've mentioned so far, we've been interested in knowledge because it has enabled us to do something else perhaps. But I think we are simply curious creatures. We just want to know things, to understand the world for its own sake, not because we could make a difference, but because we seek meaning in some way, perhaps, or simply truth. So, for example, take the huge amount of time and money that is spent into investigating the origin of the universe. Enormous, technologically very sophisticated machines are built to try and discover what the universe was like at the very beginning. What is that? What could we do with that knowledge? Clearly we've survived perfectly well without it. Perhaps it will have technological implications for the future, though we can't really see what those are at the moment. But it's simply the desire to know, for instance, the discovery of Higgs boson, or what happened in that very, very, very short space of time after the Big Bang. We are simply curious. And we can see that curiosity manifest in many other areas of knowledge, many other ways in which people spend their lives in universities trying to discover things. So I think it's satisfying to us for its own sake to discover the truth or to make our experience meaningful. So that kind of gives an impetus, a motivation to philosophers to then ask about knowledge. What can we know and how can we know it? And that's really what this course in epistemology is all about. It's sort of reflecting on this aspect of something which is important in everyday human life and going, okay, so what are the limitations and what are the means by which we gain this? But we should perhaps first distinguish between three types of knowledge so that we can think more clearly what we're talking about. So philosophers will distinguish between knowledge by acquaintance, the knowledge that you get through first-hand experience of someone or something. So having lived in Oxford for so much of my adult life, I can say, I know Oxford, the city. Or similarly, of a friend of mine, I'd say, yes, I know him well. And that's the kind of knowledge that you get only by being around someone. I can't write it down and put it in a textbook so that you know my friend. That wouldn't really make the right kind of sense. There's a great deal more I have in terms of my memories, in terms of my emotional responses, which are bound up with that direct knowledge of that person. We can also talk about knowing how to do things. So I know how to ride a bike. That's something which took practice. You couldn't, again, simply read a book on how to ride a bike and then get on a bike and expect to be absolutely brilliant, or indeed get more than a few feet without falling off. So in order to learn this kind of knowledge, I've had to practice. I still remember some of those practice sessions and how painful it was when I hit the pavement and I didn't manage to ride the bike. But over time, I've mastered that skill. So that's another kind of knowledge we can talk about. But the kind of knowledge that philosophers tend to be interested in for various reasons, but certainly the kind of knowledge that we focus on in this course, is propositions of claims that are true or false. Sorry, knowledge of claims that are true or false, knowledge of propositions. So I know that elephants are heavier than mice, as being my example here. This is a claim which is either true or false. Of course, I think it's true. And what I'm doing here is I've got the knowledge of the truth of a proposition, what is said by a sentence. So a proposition can go in a sentence which starts I believe that, or I know that, and what goes after the that is itself a sentence. So elephants are heavier than mice is a sentence. It's a sentence that makes a claim. It makes a claim to be true, to say something which is true. That's what a proposition is, or a proposition is what's expressed by such a sentence. So philosophers are quite interested in whether we know propositions, what kinds of propositions we can know, and what it is to know a proposition. What is exactly knowledge? And that's going to be our focus in the first part of today's webinar. We will be having a look at trying to understand what it is that we mean when we talk about knowledge. Well, there has been a theory which survived 2,000 years of philosophical discussion. Everyone took it really to be the right answer, which is the idea that knowledge is justified true belief. So you can find versions of this in Plato and really all the way up until the 1960s, when a famous objection that we'll look at before we finish was published. So here's the basic idea. There are really three conditions on knowing a particular proposition. So I know that elephants are heavier than mice, just in case these three other conditions are met. The proposition itself is true, so elephants are heavier than mice. I believe that elephants are heavier than mice, so I have that belief that's necessary for my knowledge, and my belief is justified. So if all three of these conditions are fulfilled, then that means I know that particular claim. And I know that particular claim if these three conditions are fulfilled. That sounds the same, but I'm going to go over why that's a little bit different. But the thought here is that what we've managed to do is identify the three elements, in this case, the three parts of what it takes to have knowledge. And if we have those three parts, then we have knowledge. And if we have knowledge, it must be because those three elements are present. They are all true. So let me just review that for a second, a bit longer, and then I'll break and give you a chance to sort of look back at these types of knowledge and this initial analysis of what knowledge is. So the idea here with these three claims, what's called necessary and sufficient conditions, is that these three claims, that you can only know something that is true. In order to know something, you have to believe that claim, and your belief has to be justified. We'll talk about each of those in turn in just a second, that they're necessary for knowledge, that it's impossible to have knowledge without each of these conditions being true in turn. So if, for example, you have a belief, even a really well-established belief, but that belief is false, then according to this theory, you can't be said to know it. So an interesting case we will come back to is people used to think that the Earth was flat. And you might say, well, they had good reason. I mean, walk around, look out. Clearly the Earth is flat, roughly speaking. So did they know that the Earth was flat? Well, according to this view, it's false that the Earth is flat, so they don't know it. So we'll have a look at each of these conditions in turn, but the thought is that it's impossible to have knowledge unless these three conditions are met. But together, the thought is that's all you need for knowledge. If each of these conditions is true, then together they are sufficient. Knowledge isn't justified true belief, which also happens to be something else. That's enough. You don't need anything more in order to know that elephants are heavier than mice than for it to be true that elephants are heavier than mice, and for you to believe with justification that it is true. So knowledge turns out to be a very special kind of belief, true belief, which is justified. So in fact, those two things are the same. You have knowledge when you have a justified true belief, and whenever you have a justified true belief, you have knowledge. They are one and the same thing. It's a bit like thinking, well, what is water? How would we understand what water is? And you sort of do an analysis of water, and it turns out that water is a molecule made up of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. So both hydrogen and oxygen are necessary for water. You can't have water without the presence of oxygen or without the presence of hydrogen. But it also turns out that there's nothing more to water than the right mix of hydrogen and oxygen atoms in certain kinds of molecules, H2O. So all it takes to have water is to have hydrogen and oxygen atoms bound together in the right way. So H2O and water are the same thing. That's the kind of analysis which is being provided here. Okay, I'm going to pause just for a couple of minutes there for you to discuss these initial claims and the types of knowledge that I've covered fairly swiftly. And if you've got any questions just on this, please do let me know. I'm going to go on and have a look at why we might believe that the justified true belief theory is true. And then I'm going to look at the question of truth in particular, and more briefly, the question of justification. And then we'll stop again after that. So that's what's coming up next. Take a couple of minutes just to think or to talk if you've got any questions, anything that I can clarify, anything that you want to raise at this stage, and I'll answer them as soon as we're back. Okay, well, no questions have come in yet, so I hope that means that that has made good sense to you so far. And we can move on now to looking at why philosophers have believed that the justified true belief theory of knowledge is correct. So, Linda Zagzebski, in her article, What is Knowledge?, calls knowledge cognitive contact with reality. So the idea here is that knowledge is a relationship between what is real and our minds, and the notion of cognition here, thought. So when your thought is in connection with the world, is in connection with reality, that's when you can have knowledge. So it immediately follows from that, if we think, well, what is real? Um, what is real is described by what is true, or you might say truth and reality are the same thing. So if you believe that knowledge is cognitive contact with reality, and there's such a thing as reality, of course, those are two conditions, then it would follow that you can only know what is true. If you're thinking about something which doesn't exist, something which is not real or not true, then you can't know that because you're not in contact with how things actually are. You sort of made a mistake or you're imagining something, and those states don't count as knowledge on this view. Secondly, because we're looking particularly at propositional knowledge, we can say, so what's going on when somebody knows a proposition? Well, that's a sort of relationship between their thought and that claim. They take that claim, like elephants are heavier than mice, or giraffes have very long necks, or I'm not quite sure why I'm thinking of zoo animals. But these claims, you take that to be true. That's what's going on when you know something. You are related to that particular thought, and you take that thought to be an accurate description of reality. And that, Zagzebski, just is what belief is. What it is to believe something is to take a particular claim to be true. What it means to say, I believe that elephants are heavier than mice, is that I accept the claim, elephants are heavier than mice, as true. So if in knowledge I'm doing that, I'm taking a proposition to be true, that means that when I know something, I must be believing it. So we've got the idea from these two sort of accounts, this sort of unpacking, that knowledge has got to be true belief at least. So that's the kind of initial movement towards the first two conditions. So what about justification? This is a little bit more complicated, but there is a difference that we normally want to make between belief, which just happens to be true, and knowledge. So the thought here is that there are cases where we can think that somebody has a true belief, but it's really just sort of lucky. Um, so I've given an example here of astrology. So suppose I read my horoscope and it says, next week, I'm going to be rewarded for a great achievement or something like that. And I come to believe it. And it comes out to be true. Did I know? Well, you might well say, not really, because there was no real reason to believe that was going to happen. No astrological reason, in that astrology isn't based on a system that we can really think is well evidenced. We don't have reason to believe these predictions. I mean, if you've got the forecast, the weather forecast, then meteorology tends to do perhaps a little bit better. So if you say, do you know what the weather is tomorrow? And I said, yes, it's supposed to rain. Do I know it's supposed to rain? Well, I mean, this is England and it's difficult, but you might say at least, that's not, if I do have that belief, it's based on a good system of scientific evidence. So maybe it would count as knowledge. I know it's going to rain. We also want to say that when somebody's forming a belief, they should do so well to get knowledge. They shouldn't be biased or draw on something which is, pandering to emotion in a way which is bad. So, for example, if you were sitting on a jury, and somebody walks in, and the defendant walks in, and you just take one look at them and the way that they're dressed and the way that they appear, and you say they're clearly guilty. You could be right. You could be right that they're guilty. That could be a true belief. Do you know they're guilty? Well, what's the basis for your belief that they're guilty? It seems to be prejudice, dislike the way they walk or the way that they're dressed or whatever it is. That doesn't count as knowledge because you haven't formed that belief in the right way. You haven't taken care to look at the evidence or thought about it rationally. So we use this term knowledge to pick out those true beliefs that we think are good in this way. They're formed on the basis of evidence. We've used reasoning. In other words, we have a justification, a reason that we can give for thinking that this belief is true. It's not accidentally true, and it's not the result of sort of prejudicial or poor thinking. So now we want to say, okay, so knowledge is justified and true, and it's a form of belief. So that would be why you might think, just from thinking about the nature of knowledge and what it might be, that it could be justified true belief. It's important to notice that on this theory, knowledge doesn't require certainty. That's something we might come back to towards the end. Do you have to be certain to have knowledge? Because sometimes we do use the word know like that anything you can't be absolutely certain of, you can't be said to have knowledge of. This particular theory rejects that, unless you want to say that what it is for a belief to be justified is for it to be certain. But few people kind of hold on to that. So you might think that knowledge is certain true belief, and that would be a different theory. But we'd need to have a look at the arguments for that. Why should we think that justification is not enough for knowledge and we need certainty as well? So on this view, we can be fallible. That is to say, we could have made a mistake, but as long as we have really good reasons for what we believe, and our belief is in fact true, that does count as knowledge, even if the belief is not certain or established beyond all doubt. Actually, let me just take another minute there for you to sort of think about those three reasons for thinking that knowledge is true, that knowledge is belief, and that knowledge is justified. And if you want to ask questions on certainty or things that come up, do come up. Do ask them now. I'll try and make sure there's time at the end to return to that topic as well. But do ask them now if you would like to. Speak to you in just a minute. Okay, there aren't any further questions at this stage, but as I say, we'll come back to that. So please do feel free to type in any questions as they arise, and I'll try to make sure that I deal with them as well. Okay, so our first question now is truth really necessary? We've seen the reason that Zagzebski gives, which is that knowledge is cognitive contact with reality. But is that right? Is that the right understanding of the relationship between our beliefs and truth? Could knowledge really be just justified belief? Well, what sorts of circumstances would they have to be to say that somebody knows something which is false? Certainly, we don't normally say that. If somebody makes a mistake, we would more likely to say, well, you think that you know that, but you're wrong. So someone says, oh, I know flamingos are gray. You go, no, flamingos aren't gray. And not only are flamingos not gray, you don't know that flamingos are gray. You've made a mistake. I mean, think about the idea that an exam is a test of knowledge. If it's a test of knowledge, then the answers that you get wrong were not what you knew. They were what you thought you knew, but you were wrong. So you didn't know them. So that's a sort of, we don't normally say, that you know things where your belief is in fact mistaken. So in normal everyday circumstances, we may well reject the idea that not see people can know what is false. That's kind of defending the view that knowledge has to be true belief. But let's go back to that question about whether people knew that the Earth is flat. And we need to sort of start by pointing out that, we've met the justification condition. So we want to say you've got a justified belief, because something could fail to be knowledge because it's not justified. So we want to hold on to the idea that maybe it's justified belief, but it's not true. And I think people did have good reason to think the Earth is flat. Many of the beliefs from different cultures and different times are not held without reason at all. So I've just given a couple here, that if you walk around on the Earth, if you've not had a chance to move away from the Earth, and you can kind of see from space that it looks like a sphere, or that you haven't sailed all the way around the Earth, which of course was not done until the late 15th century, then we've got good reasons to think that the Earth is indeed flat. So is that sufficient to say that people knew that the Earth was flat? Well, that kind of gets a bit tricky, because suppose that you say that they did. Well, we've got different possibilities here. They did know that the Earth is flat because knowledge and truth are separate. So knowledge is not true belief, it's just justified belief. That's one possibility. A second is to say people didn't know that the Earth was flat because knowledge requires actual truth. I've put objective truth here. There are facts about this, and they got the facts wrong, and so they didn't know. But what people sometimes say is, well, it's true for them. It was true for them that the Earth is flat. And so we could say, yeah, knowledge is justified true belief, but truth itself changes. There's true for people who used to think the Earth is flat, and now for us, it's true that the Earth is round. I wonder if we can make sense of this idea. What does it mean to say that it was true for them that the Earth was flat? Now, one possible answer is just to say, well, they believed it. Now, I know they believed that the Earth was flat. So if you say, well, it's true that it was true for them that the Earth is flat means they believed the Earth was flat, then all you're doing is saying when people used to believe that the Earth was flat, they believed the Earth was flat, which is not informative at all. So now I'm back to the question as to whether knowledge requires truth. You say, well, truth is whatever you believe it is, then knowledge is just belief. And that would mean that you could know things, again, which we can't talk about, truth or falsehood. Maybe that's what it means. But I don't really understand yet exactly what it is to say that it was true for them. Because there does seem to be a difference between having a belief and having a true belief. So, for example, if it was sufficient to make something true that you believe it, the quickest way to cure cancer would be to persuade someone that they didn't have cancer. And so as soon as they believed that they didn't have cancer, they don't have cancer, because it's true for them that they don't have cancer. And that's all there is to truth, that truth is simply the same as believing. Well, obviously, I take it's obvious that believing that you don't have cancer doesn't mean that it's true that you don't have cancer. And we can't cure cancer by getting people to believe that they don't have it. So there must be such a thing as making a mistake over, say, whether or not you have cancer. So the fact that I might say of somebody who is deluded about whether they've got cancer, it's true for them they don't have cancer, I clearly still need to have some sense in which I want to say, but it's true that they do have cancer. So it looks to me like in that kind of case, we need to separate out what is true and what people believe. So let's just call that belief. Let's not call that true for them. Or again, if it was true for them that the Earth was flat 600 years ago, they believed it, and it's true for us that the Earth is round. What happened to the Earth? Did it used to be flat? Because it was true for them that it was flat. And now it's become round. I mean, that's rather bizarre. Why, when people changed their beliefs, there was this huge shift, and the Earth went from being flat to being round. But also, why would people think that the Earth was round when, in fact, it was true that it was flat for them? I mean, surely it was something to do with the investigation of the shape of the Earth that led us to change our beliefs from thinking that the Earth was flat to thinking that the Earth was round. But if it was already true for them that the Earth was flat, they had no reason to think that it's round. So the Earth presumably doesn't change shape according to people's beliefs, but also unless the Earth was already round, even though they thought it was flat, then you'd have no reason to change your beliefs from thinking it was flat to thinking it was round, because you would have been wrong to think it was round because it was true for you that it was flat. So I haven't fully understood what it means to say that something is true for a person or true for a culture beyond they believe it. But I'd rather just use the word they believe it and then say, yeah, but is their belief true? So of these three possibilities, if we want to say that it was true for them that the Earth is flat, I've suggested that that's not a real possibility. I can't quite make sense of that. So either they did know that the Earth was flat because knowledge and belief are the same thing, or they didn't know that the Earth was flat because knowledge and belief are not the same thing. You need true belief for knowledge. So if one was to say, okay, knowledge is not justified true belief, it's just justified belief, you have to say that truth is irrelevant to knowledge. Well, is it? Do we want to say that any belief about the Earth's shape counts as knowledge about the Earth's shape? Is this because, in fact, there is no such thing as objective truth? That's why we can't say that knowledge is true belief, because there's no such thing as truth at all. Well, if there is no such thing as truth at all, it's not true that the Earth is round, or it's not more true that the Earth is round than that it's flat or that it's a triangle. And now I'm getting a little bit confused because that makes geometry difficult as well as technology and a variety of other things. So what does it mean to say there's no objective truth? And maybe there's no objective truth about some things. Maybe there's no objective truth about morality, but that would just mean you can't have knowledge about what's right and wrong. But to say there's no objective truth at all would mean that you can't say what's right and wrong in, say, science or maths. So it's really important when we're thinking about these things is, of course, to say that somebody has made a mistake is not to say that they're stupid or unjustified or irrational. Right? To say that a belief is not true is not to say that a belief is unjustified. We can have really, really good reasons for false beliefs. And it's not until we get completely new evidence or different kinds of evidence that we're able to see what our mistake is. So, for example, why do we now think that the Earth is round? Well, for a start, I'm sure you have all seen photos of the Earth from space, and that's quite important. And if you hadn't seen those photos from space and you hadn't learned about Christopher Columbus, and maybe nobody had talked about it to you, maybe you'd think that the Earth was flat. And Australia is on the same plane as we are over here. You don't have to sort of go round, literally around the world. You just go along. You may have thought that, and you wouldn't have been stupid to think that because, hey, that's what our experience indicates. So thinking that a belief is false is not to think that the person who holds that belief is unjustified or irrational. We want to separate those two conditions. Nor if we say that some beliefs are objectively true, do we have to say that those beliefs are certain or that we haven't made a mistake. We could still allow that there's such a thing as making a mistake about what's true and hold on to the idea that nevertheless knowledge is always true. Now, this might raise further questions about what we can know or what we can know that we know. But again, it's important to separate off the idea of truth from the idea of certainty, just as it is from the idea of justification. So it's important as well that if you're sort of saying, well, it was true for them, you're not saying there's no such thing as knowledge or we can't know things. To say it was true for them and it's different, but true for us, so they knew it and we know it, though we have different things, that's relativism about knowledge, relativism about truth. And so you can know things whenever it's true for you. That's very different from saying we can't really know. There's no such thing as knowledge because, well, it's not because there's no such thing as truth. Skepticism would say we don't know things because there is truth and we don't know it. If there's no such thing as truth, then that's not skepticism. That's a different position in philosophy again. Okay, I'm going to pause there again. Those were some comments on whether truth is necessary for knowledge, and I've defended the line that it is. We're going to end after the break with looking at whether justification is necessary and, in fact, whether it's sufficient. So we'll end with those two thoughts. If we've got a little bit of time, we'll have a look at the idea of certainty once again before we move on to our second topic this afternoon. Talk to you in a minute. Okay, nothing has come in yet, so I'm hoping that means that at least that was clear, even if you don't agree with me. Of course, there's no requirement to agree with me, as long as you've got some good reasons for disagreeing with me. Great, okay, so looking at justified true belief, we've looked at the condition as to whether truth is necessary, and I've suggested that it is in some form. So let's have a look at whether justification is necessary. We won't have time to look at belief as well, but I thought these two would be quite interesting. So is justification necessary? And sometimes we do use the word know to mean believe truly. Not always, but you might want to say, well, that doesn't really capture what we mean by knowledge. So for example, go back to that exam case. Suppose you have just sort of memorized a bunch of things, but you don't really understand it and you don't really have reasons, you don't know how it hangs together, but nevertheless, you manage to answer a series of questions about it. You might want to say that, you do know what you're talking about in that kind of case, or you know well enough. We're not that interested in what somebody's justification is. If I say, oh, who wrote the Meditations? You go Descartes. And I go, why do you think that? You may not sort of have put all of your evidence together. You may not be able to pull something, but I wasn't that interested. I just wanted the true answer. I wanted the right answer to the question. I'm not that interested in the justification. But you might say, well, okay, you've got it, but perhaps that isn't really what we really want from knowledge. So there is some kind of cognitive contact with reality there, but it doesn't feel quite sort of firm enough. So it may well be that, we looked at this earlier, the possibility of true beliefs which aren't knowledge. So certainly if some cases of true belief look like they count as knowledge, it's not a general claim we can make. Think of that case again of thinking that somebody is guilty just on the basis of what they're dressed like. Even if you're right, that's very hard to say that you know that they're guilty. So we can't generally just say that knowledge is the same thing as true belief, even if we use the word on occasion with that meaning. But maybe justification isn't necessary because although we need more than sort of accidentally true belief or true belief on its own, maybe we don't need justification. And I'm going to come back to this suggestion in our second topic this evening to look at the reliabilist theory of knowledge. So I'm going to sort of just park that one, but there's a possibility that we don't need justification, that knowledge is not justified true belief if we can supplement some other condition for the justification condition. So it's true belief plus something, but maybe it's not plus justification. Anyway, since we're going to come back to that fairly shortly, I'm going to put that down, we're going to put that to one side. So perhaps knowledge does require something more than true belief. Perhaps that is justification. So let's turn it around and ask, is that enough? Could there be cases where somebody does have a true belief that's justified, but we don't want to say that they have knowledge? So is it sufficient? So yes, it's true that whenever you have knowledge, you have a justified true belief, but you have justified true belief plus something. Okay, something else has to go into it, a fourth ingredient perhaps. Is it enough? And this was a very famous turning point in the history of epistemology. As I said earlier on, for thousands of years, people had thought that the justified true belief theory was pretty much correct, until 1962, if my memory serves, where a philosopher called Gettier wrote this very short philosophical paper where he gave a couple of examples in which somebody had a true belief that was justified, but which, he said, our intuition is that we don't want to call this justified true belief knowledge. So I'll just run through one of these cases, a case of Smith and Jones. And Smith and Jones are applying for a job. They're applying for the same job. And they were in the waiting room together, and Jones, sort of just idly passing the time, takes all the coins out of his pocket, empties his pockets onto the table, and counts through his coins. And Smith can perfectly well see that there are 10 coins there, and Jones pops them back in his pockets. So, okay, it was a sort of belief that Smith forms, which is that Jones has 10 coins. But it also turns out that at some point in this process, Smith acquires, maybe he talks to the people on the interview panel or something like that, and he's pretty much told outright that Jones is going to get the job. Okay, that he's not going to get the job. I mean, ignore Smith's feelings, poor Smith. So he has very good reason to believe both that Jones will get the job because the person who's going to award the job has just told him, say, and he has good reason to think that Jones has 10 coins because he's just seen them count them out. So he's got, those are two justifiable beliefs. So you can substitute in believing that Jones is a man, and I think we can agree that's a justifiable belief under those circumstances too, that the man who will get the job has 10 coins. Now that's a deduction. It's by matter of pure logic that you can arrive at that conclusion. So he starts off with these two independent beliefs. Jones will get the job. Jones has 10 coins. And from that, he forms a third belief. The man who will get the job has 10 coins. Now, given that he was justified in his first two beliefs, it looks like he's going to be justified in his last belief that the man who will get the job has 10 coins as well. But for whatever reason, it turns out that Smith gets the job, not Jones. It also turns out, completely unknown to dear Smith, who didn't unload his pockets, that he has 10 coins in his pockets. All right, so those are two circumstances, but in fact, that makes it true that the man who will get the job has 10 coins. Now, we said that Smith's belief that the man who will get the job has 10 coins was justified because he inferred it from two justified beliefs. And it also turns out to be true. But of course, the man, when he first formed that belief, was originally based on Jones. But what makes it true is that the man who gets the job is Smith. And that's a reason, a very good reason, for thinking that Smith's belief is both justified and true, but doesn't count as knowledge. The thing is that it's got accidentally true. He's inferred his true belief that the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket from a false belief. Now that false belief is justified. The belief that Jones would get the job is false, but it is justified. He had really good reasons for thinking it. So that doesn't count as knowledge, but nevertheless, he inferred a true belief from a false belief. And that's a reason for think that it's not knowledge. So this is called a Gettier case, an example of a justified true belief which we are reluctant at best to call, at least to call knowledge. And that's because what makes it true and what the justification for believing it are quite separate. What makes it true is that Smith gets the job. But Smith's justification for thinking the man who will get the job has 10 coins has everything to do with Jones and nothing to do with himself. So the justification is given by his beliefs about Jones, but the truth is given by a situation which he himself fulfills. That was Gettier's objection to the justified true belief theory. It wasn't that any of the three conditions weren't necessary, it's that they were together insufficient. So let's return just for a moment, and then we must end, to the possibility that why this doesn't count as knowledge is because and this notion of accidental true belief is because we should have turned to certainty. So the view that that knowledge requires certainty is called infallibilism. Infallibilism means that, well, there's two ways of putting it. You could say that it wasn't justified. That's the way of putting it here, that for justification, justification requires certainty. Another way of putting infallibilism is that knowledge is certain true belief, and certainty and justification are different. But I'm sort of running those two together here. So for a belief to be justified is for a belief to be certain. But the main claim of infallibilism is that certainty is required for knowledge. So knowledge is certain true belief. And of course, then Smith's initial beliefs aren't justified. You can't be completely certain that Jones is going to get the job on the basis of being told. I mean, particularly it's about the future. So you might say it's not certain that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket for all kinds of reasons. So it doesn't count as knowledge. The problem with infallibilism is that almost nothing is certain. So if infallibilism is true, we know almost nothing, that human beings just don't know things. And that's kind of hard to accept. It's certainly at odds with the normal way in which we talk about knowledge. So for example, we talk about scientific knowledge. But do we have any scientific knowledge? Can you be certain that the world is real? Can you be certain that science is describing it? Probably not. Most scientists reject the idea that their claims are certain. So that would seem that we have no scientific knowledge, and that would be an unfortunate implication of infallibilism, one that some people adopt. The second objection is also, what do you call a belief which is justified, which you have evidence and reason for, like say scientific theories which are really, really well supported? What do you call it if it is true, given that you're not going to call it knowledge? Well, you just have to call it, I suppose you call it justified true belief. But then, of course, we need to make the distinction between accidentally justified true belief and sort of where the justification is connected to the truth. The fact that we don't have another word for that is telling, because clearly we do want to make a distinction between those sorts of beliefs which are robust, which are good, which we formed on the basis of reasoning and evidence, and those that we haven't. So it would be really helpful to call the first lot knowledge. So infallibilism doesn't seem to allow us to recognize that distinction as a distinction between knowledge and something else. So that just leaves us with the question, which I'm going to leave you with. What is knowledge then, if it isn't justified true belief? So Gettier seems to have shown that there could be cases of justified true belief which are not knowledge. We could say, well, it's certain true belief, but there are problems with that view. And so we end up with the question that we started with. So what is knowledge? And we're a bit perhaps further along. Perhaps it still involves belief. Perhaps it involves truth. But what else does it involve as well? Okay, I'll give you just a moment to reflect on that. Also, just to sort of take a quick break. If you've got any questions on this, then please do ask them, and then we will move to our second topic this evening, which is reliabilism. Okay, then let's get straight into it and have a look at what reliabilism is as a theory of knowledge. It's an attempt to ask the question, which the justified true belief theory also attempts to ask, which is, what is knowledge? And just to remind you, of course, just from a moment ago, what justified true belief is includes these three claims: that you know something if the proposition is true, if you believe that proposition, and if your belief in that proposition is justified. And the thought is that this is a complete account of what knowledge is. That knowledge, you have this knowledge if the three conditions are met, and if the three conditions are met, you have knowledge. So we've been looking at some problems with this theory. The possibility that maybe one of these conditions is not necessary, and then the view that maybe all three of these conditions together are not sufficient. And the third of those is the objection which was raised by Gettier in his paper. So reliabilism has a different account of what knowledge is. Now the structure is very much the same, but it's going to change the third claim there. So reliabilism about knowledge is the view that you know that a particular proposition is true if that proposition is true, if you believe that proposition, and if your belief is produced by a reliable cognitive process. So this is the new bit, and the bit that we really need to spend time on. So the first thing, what do they mean by cognitive process? A cognitive process is just a process of thought, of cognition, which produces beliefs. So there are different ways by which we arrive at the beliefs that we have. Those are cognitive processes. So, for example, somebody tells you and then you believe it, or you use your eyes and you look around and you discover things about the world, or you read in a book. These are all different ways, which is kind of combination of using your eyes and somebody telling you. These are ways in which we form our beliefs. So these are cognitive processes. A reliable cognitive process, the simplest definition, is simply one that produces a very high percentage or a high percentage of true beliefs. So most of the beliefs that you form on the basis of listening to what people say or using your eyes are true. That would make those reliable if that is in fact correct. Okay, or again, you may remember something. So I believe, what did I have for breakfast? Ah, yes, I believe I had a bowl of cereal. What am I basing that on? Memory. Well, these things can go wrong. A reliable process doesn't have to produce 100% of true beliefs, but the majority, a high percentage of the beliefs that we acquire on the basis of listening to people, that's testimony, on the basis of our sense perception, on the basis of our memory, these are true. You might doubt some of those, and perhaps it does change over time or in different circumstances. So it would be knowledge if I had a belief which was true and caused, created, produced by a cognitive process which most frequently produces true beliefs. So it's important that, of course, if I have a false belief, if I'm misremembering what I had for breakfast and I actually had toast and not cereal, that doesn't count as knowledge, according to this. But that's not because it's not produced by a reliable process, but because it's false. So all three of these conditions are important. So yes, of course, even reliable processes go wrong sometimes. I misremember things. I don't see well. Somebody tells me something which is in fact false. I don't have knowledge according to reliabilism in those cases, but that's because what I've been told is false. So as long as what I believe on the basis of one of these processes is true, and these processes generally produce true beliefs, that's all it takes for knowledge. That's important. Okay, now how reliable? You could vary it. So you might want to sort of move up towards the certainty measure. Only those processes which produce 100% of true beliefs produce knowledge. Or you could move it kind of further away. I mean, to be honest, I don't think we can really give a percentage for some of these things. I mean, how many beliefs have you formed on the basis of looking at things over your lifetime? And how many of those were true? Enormously difficult to sort of do numbers, but we can pretty much say from experience that by and large, using our eyes is a good way to discover what's in our environment. Now, why do we need more than true belief? Well, we've talked about this, that knowledge is good, and it's not accidental. So it must be something which is not simply true belief. While the justification theory, while justified true belief theory said, well, what you need here is evidence. You need to form your beliefs on the basis of the evidence that you can gather, the reasons which you have for believing something. So that understands knowledge as the product of a certain kind of operation of reasoning. That's important because we're going to see that's the basis of an objection in just a minute. You need to be able to sort of correctly connect different bits of information to produce a belief that's justified. And it's that process and what you yourself are able to say in support of a belief that makes your belief knowledge. So it's good because you've used your reasoning. Reliabilism rejects that because it doesn't talk about what you're doing, it's just talking about the processes. So it wants to say, no, there are beliefs which aren't justified. They're not formed on the basis of reasoning about the evidence or being able to answer questions about why you think something. Instead, let's connect knowledge to that very first idea that I said, well, why is the knowledge important to us? It helps satisfy our needs. Let's connect knowledge to our animal nature rather than our rational nature. Just as natural beings which are alive, we need knowledge. And we need to gain this information not through necessarily through a process of reasoning, which is difficult or challenging, but however we gain it, it's something which would be great. So just looking and seeing, isn't it? You don't have to be able to think about that. You can just look and see. And because vision is something which produces a high percentage of true beliefs, that really is knowledge. And the advantage here is that that means we can talk about young children and animals having knowledge. Don't we want to say that? So, don't we want to say that the dog knows that you've just come home? You walk in the door, it hears you, you've rung and it smells you, it hears you, and it starts barking, and it's all excited. It knows you're there. What are the dog's reasons? Do dogs think with reasons? Or did it just hear you and know that you were home? Is there a process of, do we want to talk about inference? Do we want to talk about evidence? The dog gathers the evidence for whether you've returned. That doesn't seem right. Similarly with very young children or children before language, they can't put things into words yet there are some things that they know, and they know just by seeing them, for example, just by seeing what's in front of them. So young children and animals, they don't have that kind of sophisticated psychology that we would talk about justification, right? A dog doesn't have a justification for its beliefs. We can talk perhaps about the justification, but that doesn't really echo what's going on in the dog's mind about gathering evidence or weighing up the probability or anything like that. So of course we can know things about people coming home, but the dog can't do that. So if the justified true belief theory was right, because the dog can't justify its belief isn't justified. Right? It needs to be something where the mind that has the knowledge has the justification. We have the justification, the dog has the belief, so there's a problem. So reliabilism says, but you don't need that. You don't need to be able to think in that complicated way. So knowledge isn't justified true belief because young children and animals have knowledge, but they aren't able to offer justifications. Instead, what we should do is say the reason we think that they have knowledge is because they have ways of finding out about the world, which can satisfy their needs. In the wild, animals can find food source and a water source. They can remember these things. They can detect these things. This is what knowledge really is. So they have reliable cognitive processes. So we should say that knowledge is reliable true belief and not justified true belief. All right, I'm going to pause there again, just to give you a moment to think about that objection to the justified true belief theory and that kind of defense of reliabilism. And if you've got any questions, then please do ask them when we come back. Talk to you in just a moment. Okay, so hopefully that's clear as to why reliabilists think that their theory of knowledge is better than that of justified true belief. It allows us to say that more things count as knowledge, and it also allows us to say that more kinds of creature have knowledge. So if we were justified true belief theorists, it looks like we would have to deny knowledge to animals and young children, and that doesn't sound right. So if we want to say that they can have knowledge, then we need to change our theory. We can pose, however, a similar objection to reliabilism as we did to justified true belief. Is it possible, we can ask, for something to be a reliable true belief, or true belief which is produced by a reliable cognitive process, but yet fail to count as knowledge? In other words, we can do Gettier cases where instead of showing that a belief is justified and true but isn't knowledge, we can show that it's been reliably produced and true but isn't knowledge. So here are two such cases. Let's work through them in turn. The first one comes from a philosopher called Alvin Goldman, and he's in process of developing a sophisticated version of reliabilism. So he sets this to set it as an objection to his own theory, and then he tries to go on and solve it. So suppose somebody is driving through the countryside, and he arrives at rather a strange part of the countryside in which, for whatever reason, the practical jokers down at the county office have decided to build a number of facades of barns. That is to say, just one side of the barn, and it's the side which is facing the road. And so driving along from the road, as long as you're not absolutely staring at something, but you see it, it would look like a normal barn. It's all there in perspective and so on, but it's just flat. It's a flat surface. It's not a whole barn, but it's good enough to fool the eye. So Henry gets to this part of the county, and he starts driving through here, and he's using his vision, a reliable cognitive process. And he often thinks to himself, goodness, there's a barn and there's another barn, and there are a lot of barns around here. And so he has lots of false beliefs that these barn facades are in fact whole barns. So he doesn't know that they're barns because they're not. But then there's also some real barns. Perhaps there's just one real barn in Barn County, and he thinks that's a barn. And in this case, of course, he's right. That is a barn. It's not a facade, and so it's a true belief. It's also produced by just looking. Now, vision is normally very reliable, so that doesn't seem to be the problem. So his belief is true, and it's produced by a reliable process. But in the context of Barn County, when he's just seen a whole bunch of barn facades and he's thought that's a barn falsely, do we really want to say that his true belief that that's a barn is knowledge in this situation? And the suggestion is that we don't want to say that that counts as knowledge, because he just produced, by exactly the same reliable process under the same situation, he just produced a whole bunch of false beliefs. But of course, vision is normally reliable, so it counts as a reliable process. So can we really say that knowledge in this instance is a true belief produced by a reliable process? Or do we have to say, well, it's only accidentally true, even though it's produced by a reliable process? It's only accidentally true that he has this belief that that's a barn because he's had it falsely about lots of barn facades. Here's another possible example, again rather far-fetched, but all these ones are. We're trying to figure out what knowledge really is, what it means to talk about knowledge. So in this case, Smith comes in. We've got Smith and Jones again. So Smith comes in to see the doctor, and Smith has many symptoms, all the symptoms of having a particular virus, which is well known. And so the various tests are taken, and the lab tests the samples that Smith provides, and they say, the tests come back and say, yes, Smith has got this virus X. So the Dr. Jones believes that Smith has this virus. Now that looks, if we were looking at justified true belief, that certainly looks justified, but it's also, we're looking at reliable means here. Doing lab tests on blood or other samples to check whether somebody has a particular virus and drawing upon previous medical knowledge, that's a pretty reliable process. Okay, so it's a reliable process coming to form this belief on the basis of the symptoms which Smith is manifesting and on the basis of the lab tests. These are reliable processes. However, in fact, there's an unknown virus Y, which hasn't been discovered before, and that's what Smith has. But it produces the same symptoms and acts the same under lab tests as the virus X. So all of these symptoms and all of these tests turned out positive because of virus Y. In fact, that's what had been detected, was virus Y. And now it would seem, well, if Smith just had virus Y, then of course Dr. Jones's belief that he has X would be false. So let's just add on this idea. Actually, no. So while all of the symptoms were produced by virus Y, because Smith has had virus Y for, say, 3 or 4 or 5 days, Smith has just caught virus X, maybe just in the waiting room, maybe on the way to the hospital. So far too recent for the virus to be producing any symptoms. I mean, think about the cold or something like that. You have to have had the virus for 24 hours before you start snuffling and sneezing and so on. So Smith has the virus, but it hasn't produced any of the symptoms, and it hasn't got into those parts where the samples were taken for the testing. So Smith has virus X, but the method by which Jones used to come to the belief that Smith has the virus X are perfectly reliable. And yet, do we want to say that Dr. Jones knows that Smith has virus X? And again, it just seems too accidental. I mean, the accident here is that Smith has just caught virus X. If Smith hadn't just caught virus X, then Dr. Jones's belief would have been false, although it was produced by a very reliable process. So it's just by chance that it's true. So this is Linda Zagzebski's example. She says this is something where we don't want to say that this is knowledge either, that what makes the belief true and the kind of truth detection that was going on in the reliable processes has come apart in this particular kind of case. So looks like reliabilism is in very much the same position as the justified true belief theory when it comes to Gettier cases. Maybe we can say something more general about that, and maybe that will move our understanding of knowledge on as to what's going on in these kinds of accidental cases. But for now, I'm just going to pause again. Are these cases clear? Would you want to object? What are your instincts? Would you want to say that Henry knows that he is seeing a barn when he does actually see a barn? Would you want to say, no, that's sufficient, that's okay? Would you want to say that Dr. Jones does know that Smith has virus X in these circumstances? Are you persuaded that these Gettier cases are in fact genuine cases of a lack of knowledge? If you do think that they're Gettier cases, how would you try and solve them? Those are some things to be thinking about as well, whether you've got questions on them or not. Talk to you in a minute. Okay, we've got one question who came up with reliabilism and who came up with infallibilism? Reliabilism is a fairly recent theory. It was partly in response to Gettier cases, and the name which is most associated originally with reliabilism is Fred Dretske, Dretske. He defends this form of reliabilism that we are looking at here. The name I mentioned earlier, Alvin Goldman, thinks that Dretske's form of reliabilism is too simple. Hence, he's got this kind of Gettier case. So he develops a much more sophisticated version of reliabilism, which adds in additional conditions, as well as what we've talked about, the three conditions of truth, belief, and a reliable cognitive process. So that's Fred Dretske. Infallibilism has a long history. So Plato defends a form of infallibilism, or so some people would argue, in the Republic. It's also something which Descartes seems to assume in the first meditation, where he says, in order to discover what I really know, what's really true, I'm going to just go with what can't be doubted, what is certain. So it looks like Descartes wants to say that knowledge has to be, or at least has to be based upon, certain foundations. There's also a line in Locke which suggests he wants to say, well, yeah, we talk about knowledge which isn't certain, but really knowledge does require certainty, and the rest is more or less good, true belief. So I would put infallibilism in sort of in this rationalist tradition of Plato and Descartes, certainly, but it's also something you can find in other philosophers as well. Thanks for your question. We will have plenty of time for more questions before we need to finish, so thank you for that. So I've suggested here we've got a Gettier case for reliabilism, and notice that it takes the same form as Gettier cases for justified true belief theory, which is that what makes us reluctant to say that a particular belief, a true belief which is either justified or reliable, counts as knowledge, is that the relationship between the truth and that third condition has broken down in this instant. So what's going on at this point is we've got these three conditions. It needs to be true, it needs to be believed, and then the third condition needs to be justified, it needs to be the product of a reliable process. But that third condition looks like it's independent of truth. Whether a belief is produced by a reliable process is quite different from whether or not it's true. And similarly, whether a belief is justified is quite different from whether or not it's true. And that means that in these cases of accidental, lucky, true beliefs, these can come apart. What makes it true and what makes it justified, or what makes it true and what makes it believed on the basis of a reliable process, don't have much to do with each other. So in the original Gettier case of Smith and Jones, which was an objection to the justified true belief theory, we've got this idea that Smith's belief, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, was made true by him and the number of coins in his pocket, but it was formed by thinking about Jones. Okay. So this is the problem, Zagzebski says, with both of these theories. And in fact, it doesn't matter what you stick in for your third condition, she says. As long as that third condition is independent of truth, we can create a Gettier case for it. So she says, here's how you do it. Here's a recipe for creating a Gettier case, whatever your theory is, if it's independent of truth. Start with some belief that meets that condition. So it's justified or it's produced by a reliable process. So here we've got Henry, who's looking around him. Okay, but something is weird about the situation. It's through bad luck that it's false. So he's looking at a barn facade. Or again, Smith is thinking about who's going to get the job, and he's got really good reasons to think that it's Jones. It's false through bad luck. Okay, something weird, strange has happened. But now, take away the bad luck, add some good luck to make the belief true after all. Don't take away the bad luck, add to it. So you've got bad luck, you're looking at lots of barn facades under what would normally be conditions for producing knowledge, then add in some good luck to counteract the bad luck. So you're looking at the one real barn. Or it turns out that Smith has 10 coins in his pocket, whatever it is. And so if you do it this way, if you start with a situation where a belief would normally meet that third condition and would produce knowledge except through bad luck, and then you take away that bad luck, you've managed to generate a belief which is justified or reliably produced and it's true, but there's just too much luck in the mix. It's just a matter of luck that it happens to be both true and justified. So what Zagzebski says is that tells us something about knowledge. It tells us that what makes a belief true and what makes that belief knowledge need to be more closely related. We've got to tie whatever it is that we think turns a true belief into knowledge to truth. It has to be something about the way in which we form it on the basis of its truth. Now, we don't have time to really go into the whole of her theory and her reasons for it, but she uses this in her article to defend a form of virtue epistemology. So what she's tried to do is to say, look, when you're thinking about what counts as knowledge, if you're thinking, and this of course was our big question today, right? What is it that knowledge is? She wants to say you've got to get this sort of contact with reality more secure. If knowledge is cognitive contact with reality, then the belief needs to be both true and justified for the same reasons. So we need to sort of formulate a way of talking about true belief in which its truth isn't accidental in some way. And we need to find a way of putting that into words to see how that amounts to knowledge. Okay, that sets us off on a further path which we are not going down today. It's sort of a reflection on the lessons learned from these two theories. That's if you follow Zagzebski. There are plenty of philosophers who think that we can formulate a way of connecting these two different conditions without abandoning justified true belief theory or without abandoning reliabilism in some form. So we've got some more time for you to ask questions. If you don't have any more questions at this stage, we will stop. But let me give you those time to reflect on everything we've talked about today and see if you've got any questions that you would like to ask, which I can respond to. I'll talk to you in just a couple of minutes. We've got another question that's come in on infallibilism. I think I must have started too soon. Just following up the sort of history of the theory of infallibilism. Did Berkeley contribute to infallibilism? That's a good question, which I think goes beyond my knowledge. Where I can make a connection with Berkeley is that certainly he uses the importance of knowledge to us to argue for his idealism. So I'm wondering whether you've got something like that in mind in asking the question. So I couldn't tell you officially what Berkeley's definition of knowledge is, but he does argue that there's too much we can't know unless we are idealists. We can't be said to know, for example, about the reality of what we perceive. Um, and he thinks that he doesn't argue that on the basis of certainty. He doesn't appeal to certainty in that argument. So I'm not sure whether he would want to hold an infallibilist view there. But he does think that there's simply things which if you can't know the causes of your perception, in some way, if you think the causes of your perception go beyond what you experience yourself, then you simply don't have justification. So I think Berkeley's arguments for idealism are arguments that would work equally well with the justified true belief theory. So he thinks that we have no good reason, i.e. no justification at all, to believe that physical objects exist. Now, that's not an appeal to, as I say, to infallibilism. That would work just as well with the justified true belief theory. So that's the best I can do with that question. It's a very interesting question. I'm sorry I couldn't say more on that. No other questions are coming in at the moment, so I think we will leave it there. Thank you very much for those couple of questions we had. I hope that everything was clear and that that's been helpful. We will be sending the PowerPoint to you as well as a recording of the webinar. So you will get those hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. So thank you very much for attending this webinar, and best of luck with the rest of your studies on the course. Goodbye for now.